Welcome to lesson 4 of basic HTML and CSS. Today we're going to be talking about grouping HTML elements. So what we really want to get through today is we want to learn which HTML tags are helpful, useful for grouping content. So far we've just sort of learned individual elements or individual tags, heading tags, paragraph tags, anchor tags, image tags. Now we want to start to think about the HTML file or the web page as a document, right? We want to start to think about it more as authors or writers and less as coders, even though we'll still be doing some coding. You'll learn about semantic tagging of HTML content, which really is just a fancy way of saying we want to use tags that have some kind of meaning. And so we'll talk about that a little bit, and then we'll start the building blocks of a web-based portfolio. So regardless of sort of what industry you're in or what you're trying to create in your portfolio, this lesson will help you get sort of a good baseline for those elements that you'll need in a portfolio. So what you'll need for this lesson, you'll need, again, of course, a web browser and a text editor. You can download the before and after lesson 4 zip file in the lesson content page. So that's optional, or you can just follow along with where you left off last time. So let's get going. So what we see here is a really nice website. I'll have to post a link to it. It's a website that was on the website called Site Inspire. It's a cool website that sort of provides different types of inspirational websites, inspirational designs, things like that kind of help you think about layout and design and typography and things like that. So here is a pretty simple, pretty straightforward grid-based layout for a website. And I want us to think about this web page less as individual HTML elements and more as groups of content. Okay, so before I reveal sort of the 4 groups of content that I sort of divided this into, I want you to just take 5 to 10 seconds and think about if you had to divide this into 4 different groups, what would they be? Okay, so think about that for a second. Okay, so hopefully you have that in your head. If you don't, no problem. So here are the 4 sort of high level groups of content that I would divide this page into. So the first is the header. Okay, so every website has a top section where you usually have a logo or the site title. You've got your navigation bar. In this one, you've got the search bar, and you've got, links to social media as well. But you've got a header section. Okay. So within the header section, there's multiple other sections or elements, but let's just stick to high level for now. Okay. So we've got our header section. The second thing I would sort of divide out is what I call the hero section. So this is like the top area of the website that sort of declares its intent, sort of is used as the main sort of this is what this page is about. And so this often involves a large image or a small amount of text that's sort of describing some kind of call to action. So that's the hero section. The third section I would just call main content. You might call this blog posts because it looks like, a series or a grid of blog posts. You can really call these anything you want, but there's a sort of a main content section. And then the fourth, as you might guess, is the footer section. So in the footer section, this is where you'll find things like, a sitemap or a search form or categories if you're tagging blog posts or a short about blurb or something like that. So we've got our header and we've got our hero section, main content section, and our footer section. If we were to recreate this site, or if we were to build a website, we would probably want our header and our footer to always stay the same, right? So we would want them to be consistent and uniform across from one page to the next. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we talk really quickly about HTML classes. So the last thing we'll talk about here is classes, and then we'll jump into some code. So HTML classes are a specific type of attribute that allows you to define your own values. So you can name them anything you want. So classes are super helpful in that way because they're super flexible, right? So classes are used for two major reasons. They're used for many more than this, but just the two that I want you to keep in the back of your mind is, one, to just semantically describe an element or a section, and to, secondly, provide a target to be designed visually in CSS. So for example, if we go back to our 4 major sections, if we added a class to our header and our footer, we would be able then in our CSS file, and just kind of keep this in the back of your head because we haven't jumped into CSS yet, but we'd be able to define, typography and font sizes. We'd be able to define background color, and we would be able to use the class that we've chosen for those sections and define that once and only once in our CSS file. And that would be applied to all of the headers and all of the footers throughout the entire website. Okay, so if that didn't make perfect sense to you, or you're still a little bit confused about that, that's okay. We're gonna start coding up some classes in HTML. We won't actually target them in CSS until we get to the CSS section of this course. Okay, so the main takeaways are, we want to think about our web pages as sections of content, just like any other document. And then we want to use HTML to sort of divide different sections of content. So let's jump in to where we left off. And this is kind of where we left off, is we had our picture of our dog. We had our very crude navigation bar at the top, and we had, a couple HTML tags and things like that. So feel free to download the zip in video 4, or just move ahead with where you left off in the last lesson. It's up to you. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up our index.html in Sublime Text one more time. Now, this time I'm going to actually delete everything in between the two body tags. So we're going to start from scratch here. So if I refresh, there's nothing on the page, and I'm even going to change the title here. So you can change this to your own, but I'm going to call this Chris Lamb's web portfolio. Okay. So we're going to start with building out sort of the bones or the structure for our portfolio. So you can call it, obviously you don't want to use my name, you should use your name, but you can change the title tag as well. So if we think about those major sections, our web pages or our websites might not be the exact same design or layout as the one we looked at, but we're certainly going to have the header and footer section. That's a certainty. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start to create placeholders for these different sections. So in HTML, and I will link up a library of HTML tags. And so you could have a comprehensive list if you'd like, if you're interested in that. But in HTML, there is actually, in HTML5, there's actually semantic tags for headers and footers, meaning instead of using some generic tag, there's an actual tag that it's just called the header. So that's super helpful. So I'm going to open and close at the top of the page, my header. I'm going to do a couple spaces here, and I'm going to open and close the footer. So every page will have this sort of uniform header and footer. So one thing I'm going to do though is we may have other headers that we use in our design for different types of content. And so I want to specifically define this header as something unique. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this, I'm going to use the class attribute like we talked about, and I'm going to call this site-header. So now we're just saying this header is the header for the entire site. It's going to be uniform across the entire site. Now, you probably guessed what we're going to call the footer. We're going to probably call this site-footer. Now, we could call this anything we want. We could call this thingamabob1 or whatchamacallit. But it makes most sense to use semantic labels, things that have meaning, so that we're not confused when we go to design this when we start our CSS. When we see the word site header, we'll be able to go, okay, I know exactly what that's referring to. Okay, so we've got our header and our footer, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create the outline again. So if we refresh, there's still nothing on the page here. The next section that probably all of us will have in our portfolios is what I call the hero section. And I'm going to use a tag. I could use the section tag, or I could, you could either use the section tag or you could use a div tag. There's good reasons for both. I typically like to just use a div tag. Div stands for division in HTML, and it is a tag that allows us to define any chunk of content. So we should add a class so that we know exactly what we're talking about here. And I'm going to call this div hero section, right? And you'll notice that it's got the same exact syntax or structure as any other attribute. It's the attribute, which is class, and then the value, which is equals, and in quotation marks, whatever the value is. So again, we can call this whatever we want. Now, one thing we're going to do is we're going to provide good documentation in our code here. So you would imagine if we start to get really complex and we have divs within divs within divs within divs, it can get confusing to know where one div begins and where one div ends. What's really helpful in Sublime Text is if you click on a div, you can see this little underline, this dashed line, that tells you where the div opens and closes. So for example, if I opened up another div, there's no dashed line. So that reminds me, this thing's not closed. Because remember, one of the main rules of HTML is that every tag that opens must close. So that's one cool thing about Sublime Text. Another thing you'll want to do just and make a standard practice is to comment where divs close. Okay, so to make a comment in HTML, and a comment is, you know, anything you can include any information in a comment, and it's just to help you understand the code when you go back to look at it. It doesn't actually show up on the page itself. So to do a comment, you do an opening bracket, an exclamation point, and 2 dashes. Okay, you're going to want to get used to this because we're going to do a lot of commenting. But I am going to do a comment, and I'm going to do a dot hero section, and you can write anything you want in this comment. You could write, this is where the hero closes, but I think it's easier to just use a standard a standard syntax of what the class is. So that's to open the comment. To close the comment, it's dash dash and then the greater than symbol. Okay. So now we'll always know this is where the hero section opens and here's where it closes. Okay. So we have two sections. We have our header, we have our hero section, and now we have our footer. And then the last thing we'll do is we'll just put a main content section. And I am going to close that right before the footer closes. And I'm going to do the same thing, exclamation point dash dash, and then I'll do main dash content. Okay. So, and again, you can put whatever you want in this comment. This is just to remind us where things open and close. The reason why we didn't comment for header and footer is because the header tag is semantic. So we can see where the header closes because the tag itself says header. Okay, so this is beautiful. Nothing actually shows up on the page, but we've got a great structure for our website so far. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually rename in page -2, the one that we created in video lesson 3. I'm going to rename that to about. So we'll probably have a home page. We'll probably have an about page. And then at the very least, we'll have a contact page. So, and I'm going to create a third page in Sublime Text. And I'm going to save it and call it contact.html. Okay, so these are the three main pages in our website. We have a home page, which is index, and we'll talk later about why we named it index. We have an about page, and we have a contact page. Now, what we want to do is we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We know that the content will change between these pages, but we do know that the sections within the page are probably going to stay the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this template, the entire thing. I'm going to jump in my contact page and I'm going to save it. The only thing I will change now is my title tag. So I'll just say Chris Lamb's contact page. Okay. So now we're building out the infrastructure for an actual website. I'm going to do the same thing with our about page. Okay. So I'm going to delete everything in the about page. I'm going to paste in again our starter template. Now I am going to also change the title tag to about page. And I'm going to save it. Okay. So we've got our three files, index, about, and contact, and we're in great shape. We've got a starter template to work from. We're all sort of working from the same starter template, which is totally fine. Now, before we end this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start our header, and then we'll move on to the hero and main content in the next video. So in our header section, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually probably put our logo. Okay, I'm just going to do a placeholder, site title / logo, and this is where our logo will go. It might be an image. Maybe we just want to use our name in a cool font or something. But for now, we'll just put a placeholder because we know we want our logo at the top of the header. Okay, so I'm going to save that, and we're going to refresh, and we can see our site title and logo is showing up. And then the second thing I'm going to do is I'm inside of the header tag. I'm going to nest a navigation bar, and there's an actual tag that we can use called the nav tag. Okay, so I'm going to open and close my navigation bar. Now, I'm going to add a class to this because we might have like secondary nav or navigation or, maybe multiple types of navigation on our site. So we want to specify that this is the main navigation. Okay, so I added a class called main navigation to our navigation bar. And again, we're just adding these classes for now just to remind us of what this particular HTML element is meant to do. We're not doing anything with the classes until we get into CSS. So in our main navigation, this is what we're going to do. Most navigations in HTML are actually just a bulleted list of links. So if you remember from video 1, we turned off CSS on several websites to just look at the raw HTML, and you might have remembered or noticed it was just a bulleted list of links. And so inside of our nav tag, we're going to open up a unordered list. So that's our bulleted list tag. And inside of our bulleted list tag or our unordered list tag, we need list items. So I'm going to open up a list item. I'm going to call it, we'll call it home for now. And we'll open up another list item and we'll call it about. And you can change these or use whatever language you want. But this is just so we have a rough starting point. And a list tag, and we're going to call it contact. Okay. So just as a refresher, we have a header tag. Nested inside of our header tag, we have a navigation tag. Nested inside of our nav bar tag, we have a unordered list tag. And nested inside of our unordered list, we have list items. Okay. And so every time we nest something, it's helpful to visually indent it. It doesn't actually change how the code is rendered or how the code is read through the browser, but it helps make our document more readable as we're coding. So let's save that and let's refresh, and we have the beginnings of a navigation bar. Okay. Now, obviously these don't link to anything. They're just list items. So we're going to do one more layer of nesting. So inside of our list items, we're going to create an anchor tag. We learned that in video 3. So our anchor tag needs to have an attribute, an href attribute, hypertext reference, and we're going to link it to index.html. Okay, so just as a reminder, we've got our A, we have our attribute, equals, and then in quotation marks, the hypertext reference. So the name of the file we want to link to, and then we have our closing bracket. And then after the word home, we want to close our A tag. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Going to do the same thing for about. So A, hypertext reference, about.html, and I'm going to close my A tag after the word about. And then finally, we're going to do the same thing, context.html, and we're going to close our anchor tag right after contact. Okay, so now when we refresh, we can see that they're now links, and this should take us to about. And you can tell that it's about because it has it in the title tag. And then the contact should take us to contact. So that's all working. So now we have a template for our header that we want this to be uniform across all pages on our website, because that's how websites work. They have uniform elements. So I'm going to copy everything in the header tag, and I'm going to open my about.html, and I'm going to replace what I have in the header tag with what I just copied. Okay, and I am going to do the same thing in my contact.html. I'm going to delete the current header tag, and I am going to copy the header template that we just created. Okay, so now when we we can navigate from one page to the next, no matter what page we're on. The last thing we'll do before we quit is I will, in my hero section, I'm just going to do a placeholder in a heading 2 tag, and I'm just going to say home page. I'm going to do the same thing in my about tag, h2, and then I'm going to call it about page. We can change this later, but just as a placeholder. And finally, the contact page. So now when we refresh, we can see how we can navigate from one page to the next, and we can see clearly which page we're on. So now we've got a header set up, and we are in great shape to begin coding up the home page in the next video. So until next time, I will see you later, and feel free to play around and add different things maybe to the footer if you're interested. But until next time, we'll see you later.